All right, let's welcome back to Straight Fire. First time in a couple years. He's so busy. He's on TV all the time. He's just a superstar when it comes to sports media, a Duke legend, Jay Bilas. Jay, how are you, man?
I don't know, Duke legend, that's going to get you some letters from people who actually accomplish something. I'm not sure that
Come
works.
on, man. You were in the prime of Duke when they were just building up the program way back in the 80s. And now you're watching a pretty darn stacked Duke team, Jay. I mean, this is about as good as it gets, huh?
Yeah, the thing that gets me, Jason, about Duke is their length and depth, but they have incredible size. And look, when you have the best player in the country and the presumptive number one pick in the draft, that's plenty. But they got so much around them, and they're not even 100% without Malik Brown. So if they ever get him back, yeah, it's going to be hard to imagine that look, they can get beat by, Houston can beat them. There are teams that can beat them, but Florida's their only near equal in my
Hmm.
view.
Interesting. I want to turn back the clock real quick on Duke. So I was looking into the last meeting with Arizona, and they had started Caleb Foster. I believe he's this superstar kid who was a big time 5-star recruit. They started him in that game, and I'm not exactly sure what happened, but he's been supplanted in the starting lineup, and I believe they've only lost one game since the change. Any insight into what happened there?
I don't think it was anything other than the one of the transfers they brought in, Sion James, who was at Tulane, is the better fit with the starting unit and playing more minutes because he's got tremendous size and length and defensive ability, and he's a really, he's a bigger guard, and he's a very low error, get to the rim type of player. And he's just frankly been better. That doesn't mean Caleb's not really good, but when you've got that many options, I was at that game. I did the game for ESPN,
Oh,
and I was stunned that they held, if I remember right, they held Arizona under 60 points.
55. Yep.
And I left there going, you got to be kidding me. I mean, they were so good defensively, and I'm sure Arizona could have played better, and they're way better now than they were then. But I think Duke is too. It was just the defensive prowess of that team that really sort of stood out.
Everybody's falling in love with the Caleb Love versus Duke. He obviously started for North Carolina. If he gets hot, it could be a problem for Duke. What do you anticipate them doing defensively against him? Any changes significantly or no?
I mean, I think the fact that they can put athletic size and length on him, it can be really difficult to deal with. Like as you know, Caleb Love is kind of a wild card. He can be an ace, go out and get you 30. And there have been times he's kind of been the joker of the deck where he's taken some shots where you go, what are you doing? And he doesn't stop. Like he'll keep shooting. And when he's in a bad spot, he can shoot you out of it. But it's not that often that happens. I think he only had 8 points in that game against,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember right.
Yep.
But to me, like the Caleb Love, that's the giant killer and the best, sort of the best guard, the best version of himself is the one that's getting to the foul line more often than not. And because he's strong and athletic, and when he takes the ball into the lane, he can really get into your body and get to the free throw line. And that kind of balances out. When he wants to be just the 3 point shooter, I don't think he's as good.
Mm-hmm.
And they got to find a way, and it's difficult against Duke, but they got to find a way to get out and transition. They cannot play a half court game against Duke for 40 minutes. They got to play ahead of that defense. If they got to grind it out for 40 against that set defense, that's going to be a problem for Arizona and really for most anybody.
Yeah. So you're right. Love was 3 for 13 in that game. Only took 2 foul shots, 3 turnovers. Not his best effort. But he's a boom bust guy, like you said. Let me quickly zoom out, Jay. Macro, big picture. I saw that the ratings for the first 2 rounds were the highest since 1993, and I was like, early 90s. Let me look. Oh, Fab Five. That was the Chris Webber team that went up against North Carolina, the fateful timeout. Now, obviously, that was in the championship, not the first 2 rounds. But I'm just curious. I'm a big college basketball honk, and you're at the top of the food chain when it comes to college hoops. What do you think has driven the surge in interest these first 2 rounds?
I don't really know, Jason. I
Hmm.
don't really understand how ratings work, honestly. I know that there are big brands that matter. So, in my experience over the years, when you've got Kentucky you've got Duke, you've got North Carolina, some of these brands, the ratings are consistently higher. And the tournament is an odd thing. There's a narrative out there, and I do think it's a narrative rather than a fact, that what drives interest is Cinderella and upsets and all that stuff. And I've never believed that to be true. I think there's data behind it that I could point to, but I don't have it at my fingertips to sound all smart and everything. But I think, I don't know exactly when this bracket stuff got so crazy, where everybody filling out a bracket, including your grandmother who's never seen a game or stuff like that, where that got to be such an issue. But it's funny, people say, well, God, this year I'm hearing a lot of now, after the Sweet 16 was finished, and we have the 16 teams, that, well, that's the end of college basketball. It's the death of the mid-major, and we don't have Cinderella anymore. You're like, what are you guys talking about? One data point doesn't make a trend. It's 1 year. And when people say this is the first time since 2017 this has happened, and it's only happened 5 times in the last 50 years, well, that means it's happened before.
Yeah.
And that was before NIL, and that was before the portal. Like, relax. If we get 3 or 4 years in a row of this, then we can start talking about it. But to your point about the ratings being up, it kind of goes against the theory that upsets and that's what drives ratings. The big brands drive ratings, and most of the time when some Cinderella wins, they lose the next game.
Yeah.
Most of the time when they lose the next game, they get blown out, and it's no big deal. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it. But now we've got 16 really good teams here, and if you go by all the analytics, I think the lowest rated team in the Sweet 16 is rated like 30th in the KenPom.com ratings, which is Arkansas.
Arkansas 36. Yep.
Everybody else is in the top 20, give or take. And so we're looking at sort of the best teams that the field can offer. And I do think that's going to drive more interest, not only in seeing good basketball, which I'm not sure fans care about as much as I do, because I think the average fan doesn't know the difference in any sport between a good game and a close game. But when they get a good game that is a close game, you can't get anything better than that. Yeah. And I think we're going to have that in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight and beyond. I think we're going to have great and compelling games and matchups and big brands that I think will drive ratings for CBS.
Yeah, totally agree. On your point on Cinderella, I tried to make the case that Cinderella might be dead. I don't think it's bad for the tournament, but only because right now, if you're at a low major and you have a game or two that's good in the tournament or in championship week, you're getting noticed. And the second the portal opens, you're jumping ship. So this idea that like Steph Curry stayed 3 years at Davidson, or VCU went to the Final Four with Shaka Smart, or George Mason made a run. I don't know. You look at the Final Four makeup. I don't know if you've seen this chart, Jay, but like they broke down where all the starters are from. And you can't tell some of these teams that, like, you could tell Duke and Purdue because they've got a lot of homegrown freshman guys, but most of the teams are a hodgepodge of, let me get that guy from FAU after their run. And I just wonder, I don't think it's bad for the sport. I think it's actually kind of good. And there's a lot there, but if anything jumped out at you, I'm curious your thoughts.
It does. There are a few things. So the transfer portal works both ways. So you have the really good mid-major player that was under-recruited. Take Janai Broome of Auburn. It's right there with Cooper Flagg for National Player of the Year. He's from the state of Florida. He was under-recruited out of high school. People didn't think he was that good. He goes to Morehead State. He's Rookie of the Year in the Ohio Valley Conference, and then he becomes Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. So because he was under-recruited, do people really think he's obligated to stay there and play in anonymity for 4 years? I mean, the answer to that is clearly no. When anybody who's coaching, the coach at Morehead State left and went to a better job.
Yeah.
So, I think people get the whole American way of that. But you also have a number of players that went to big places. Power 5 schools didn't play as much, and they transferred down. So McNeese State, coached by Will Wade this year, is now at NC State. So the coaches portal always open. He had players that were from Power 5 schools on his roster. Kadir Copeland is from Syracuse. I can go down the list of players that played somewhere else. So it works both ways. But when people say, okay, to your point, sometimes it is true that a player has a great tournament, then all of a sudden he'll be at a big shot school, which I think is his right,
Yeah.
honestly, to do that if that school wants him. But like, think of Florida Atlantic. So Cinderella's dead, right? But it only died this year because she was alive 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Florida Atlantic went to the Final Four, right, in 2023.
Yeah.
Every player on that roster came back the next year. Every player. Why
Mm.
did they leave? Because Dusty May went to Michigan.
Yes.
So he took the bag, went to Michigan. He took Vlad Golden went with him. Elijah Martin went to Florida, still in the tournament. And John L. Davis went to Arkansas, still in the tournament. So who do we blame there? Like, it's just it's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with any of it.
I agree.
But
Totally.
it's
Now,
not
sorry, go ahead.
Cinderella. I guess my point, my long-winded point is Cinderella didn't die. It's still out there. And like Drake won this year, McNeese won, St. Mary's won, Gonzaga won. You go down the list of teams that won this year. They didn't happen to win a second round game, although Colorado State, it took a buzzer beater by Maryland to keep them out of the Sweet 16. Otherwise, we'd have a Cinderella. And so then the last point is people say, oh man, 16 teams, 4 conferences, it's all over now, all major conferences. You're going, wait a minute now. The school portal's open too. 2 years ago, Houston's in the American, BYU's in the West Coast Conference, and Arizona's in the Pac-12. If we had the same field 2 years ago, 7 different conferences. Does that make everybody feel better?
That's a good point.
I mean, it's the same grouping. And 2 years ago, BYU was considered a cute little mid-major, that had some older players because they went on missions and all that stuff. And now they're another power conference team that's taking over the world. Come on, man. Like, let's get some perspective here.
Yeah, no, those are great points. It's interesting. The 2 teams you mentioned, Drake, their coach left, their star. He's headed to Iowa. It sounds like Bennett Sturts. And then there was another team that, Will Wade at McNeese. He's now at NC State. It sounds like he's going to be bringing some guys. So, those were great stories, but they're not going to do it again next year. You just got to find the new team. Now, let me ask, I don't know, this is a little dense, but the whole revenue sharing deal, I read about it in The Athletic. It sounds like there's a world where the A10 and the Big East actually benefit a lot because they don't have to revenue share with football. Have you looked into this at all? Because it sounds like, Woj is obviously now at St. Bonaventure, and it looks like they're hitting the portal pretty hard. What do you make of all this?
Well, it is true that there are schools out there, Big East schools, A10, some others that don't have big time football. So football is going to take of the revenue sharing money, and it can be up to, like, I think it's 22% of revenue, whatever. So we're talking like $22 million, give or take, that schools can have available for revenue share given their budgets. So the lion's share of that is going to go to football, and that's fine. They can do it however they want. If they want to have a better basketball program and they're willing to, do football for less, go ahead.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with whatever they do, but they'll figure out a way to pay these players, like either through collectives or whatever. It's not going to stop at whatever this settlement revenue number is. It's just not. And what was it, Jason? 5 years ago, everybody was saying, hey, where's the money going to come from? We're not going to be able to pay it. We can't do it. Things going to be. It shows they want to have good teams. They want to be competitive, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is on athletes. With all due respect to staff and their sort of their athletic department, the most important thing in winning is the players on the field or on the court. That's the most important thing. And what we're going to see in the future is whatever the numbers are, these athletic departments are going to lean up and they're going to start putting their resources where it matters. And that's going to be on the field and on the court. And coaches are still going to make a lot of money. They may not make as much as they would have otherwise. We're going to start seeing, they're going to go, we don't need to pay you as much. We got to pay Cooper Flagg.
Yeah.
We have right now, before like all this stuff came in with revenue sharing, just that discussion. I mean, you had strength coaches for football teams making over $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Really? I'll do it for half that until, hey, lift that weight. I don't mean to take away from what they do. That's a serious job. But come on, man. Like you don't need to be doing that. They had the money and they did it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to keep doing that to that level. They're going to start getting more reasonable with what they pay people in those positions and how many people they have. And they'll really get reasonable whenever they take the private equity money, because private equity is going to come in and say, look, now you're messing with our revenue stream. You don't need all these people. Like there are twice as many suits in the team picture as there are people in uniform. You don't need that. Like let's start doing this in an efficient manner. That's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's drill down on the games real quick. So let's just do a quick game. We got to pick an upset or two in the Sweet 16. I'll let you go first. Card is yours. Simply by point spread. Is there an underdog you like in the Sweet 16 to win outright?
I like Ole Miss, Michigan State. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I would not be surprised to see Ole Miss win because they're good and they've played teams like Michigan State throughout the year. Michigan State doesn't shoot it great, but they do other things really, really well. And if they do shoot it, which they're capable of, that makes them doubly hard to beat. But Ole Miss doesn't turn it over very often. The one thing they don't do consistently that Michigan State does is Ole Miss doesn't rebound at the same level that Michigan State does. But they're athletic, they defend, and they have seen teams as good as Michigan State a lot in the Southeastern Conference. They're not going to sweat that. And then their point guard Sean Padula has played really well. He's at 40 points his first two games. He played really efficiently. So I wouldn't be surprised to see an upset there. I don't see one in the Houston Purdue game and I think the best game, the most entertaining game is going to be BYU Alabama.
That was my pick.
Yeah,
well, wait, let me back up just real quick. So you mentioned Houston Purdue. You've played a lot of games. You've been in a lot of arenas. Purdue's going to be playing in Indianapolis. Is that a big edge, no edge? What do you make of that? Because I know it's a football stadium, Lucas Oil. I haven't been in Lucas Oil when it's been configured for basketball, but Houston's already occasionally a spotty shooting team from three with Cryer and Milos. Any thoughts on that one?
I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I think it's helpful to Purdue to feel comfortable, and they're certainly going to have more fans in there because of the proximity. It's only 90 minutes or so, 100 miles to West Lafayette from Indy. So I think it's going to be helpful. I don't think it's going to carry the day given the strength and athleticism that Houston brings to the table. And I think you just identified it with the shooting. Like Houston's just as good defensively and on the glass as they've been in the last several years. I think they were Final Four last year, absent Jamal Shead getting hurt against Duke. If he didn't get hurt, I think they were in the Final Four, beating, they would have beat Duke. They would have beat NC State, in my view. But this year, having LJ Cryer, I mean, he just had 30, and I think he's the only player in NCAA history who scored 30 points in an NCAA tournament game for two different teams. He did it for Baylor, and now he's done it for Houston.
Yeah.
And Emmanuel Sharp is another long range bucket getter, and Milos Uzan has really helped at the point because he can score and distribute. So I think they're legit. Can they get beat? Yeah, but I don't think they will.
So you mentioned Alabama BYU. Obviously, it's going to be a high scoring offensive game for whatever reason. And again, I know Alabama went to the Final Four last year, but Nate Oates has had a couple clunkers in the Sweet 16, and a lot of factors are played in those games. But if anything, it feels like they've been leaking oil, in my opinion, for the last month. And I like this BYU squad. They almost choked it away against Wisconsin, but I don't know. Can they win outright, you think?
BYU, yeah. Oh, yeah, they can because they can really score and they play fast and it's kind of a mirror image a little bit. There are minor differences in the offenses they run, but they basically both want to get it down the floor and shoot it pretty quick. Nate Oates wants to get it down the floor and shoot it quick because the more passes they make, the more chances they have to turn it over. He'd rather get a shot than a turnover. But the only thing, like I hear what you're saying, I do think they've had some issues over the past several games, but I kind of look at their schedule. Like I did they lost to Florida one of the last games of the regular season in Tuscaloosa, but they played well enough to beat 95% of Division I in that game. But they played Florida.
Yeah.
And that's probably true of a number of the games they played down the stretch, because their schedule is backloaded. I think the last 6 games they played all teams ranked in the top 20. There
Yeah.
was anybody they played that wasn't ranked, and that's
Mm.
unprecedented. Well, I shouldn't say unprecedented. It's unprecedented for me. I've never seen it before. And there was a lot of kind of unprecedented in that regard in the league. But the one thing that, like, in all my years of basketball, one thing I've never been able to figure out, predict, or get a feel for is when a hot streak starts and when one ends. So Mark Sears, even though he's been putting up decent numbers, has not shot the ball well from three over his last 6 games or so. I think he's 5 for 35 from three.
Yep.
And that's not him. And I just don't see that continuing. And now that Grant Nelson appears to be healthy after that knee thing he had in the SEC tournament against Florida, they were down 47-45 at halftime, and he didn't play in the second half, and they got run. When he's
Oh.
in there, they're different because he can drive it. He's their best shot blocker. He's their best rebounder. He's their kind of hard hat guy. They have this hard hat award. He's kind of their hard hat guy that does a lot of the dirty work for them. So if he's healthy, I give them a really good chance to win. And I think they can give Duke a hard game just because of the way they play and the teams they played against. Like, they can get up and down the floor. So they're not going to grind it out against Duke's half court defense. They're going to get it down and shoot it. And
Mm.
they've got athletes, and they can make it tough on them.
Should I be worried? You mentioned Sears 5 for 35. Maybe he'll regress to being a solid shooter. What about Proctor for Duke? He is on an unprecedented. I mean, he can't miss like the last 4 games. But I think you called the ACC tournament. I think the first 2 games he was like 0 for 10 or something.
Yeah, I did the SEC tournament. This is the first
Oh,
time.
SEC. That's right. You did SEC. My bad.
Yeah, this is the first time in a long time I didn't do Dan Schulman, and I didn't do the ACC. I did the Big East for a long time, but it's always been either the Big East tournament or the ACC for me. So this was on one hand, you kind of felt, geez, I hate to miss this, but on the other hand, you're watching these SEC games going, my
SEC.
God,
Yeah.
how could this be any better? So it was a little bit of an odd feeling. But Proctor has had a great year. I didn't think he had a good year last year for him. And I think that got under his skin a little bit. And he's been much better this year. And he's always been kind of a catch and shoot guy. But this year, he hasn't had to worry about ball handling responsibilities, though he can rip and run with a rebound. He'll bring it up. But he's not responsible for the point guard stuff, so he can just work off the ball. And I think the last 2 games, he's like 13 for 16 from three, and he's averaging 22. I mean, the last guy, I think, to put up, Cooper Flagg's put up some Grant Hill numbers across the board in the tournament, but this is beyond, like, 13 for 16 from three. I don't care who they're playing. That's beyond even JJ Redick numbers for shooting.
Yeah. We'll wrap up with this one. Tennessee, Kentucky. It's round 3. Jay. And listen, I'm not trying to be mean here, but Rick Barnes has had a history of struggles in March, and obviously a lot of factors at play, injuries, what have you. A lot of people are making this whole argument, hey, it's real tough to beat a team 3 times. I don't know if Kentucky can do it, but then you've got Rick Barnes on the other side. And where do you stand on this game? It feels like a genuine coin toss to me.
I think it is a coin toss. It's kind of confounding. I did one of the games between Tennessee and Kentucky, the one at Rupp, and Kentucky had beaten Tennessee a little bit earlier at Tennessee.
Yeah.
When, if I remember right, like, Tennessee jacked up like 42 or 43 threes, and a little bit uncharacteristic, but most of them were actually pretty good open shots. But what was surprising to me was that Kentucky was able to shoot in both those games. Kentucky shot 50% from the field and three in each of the games. Nobody else has done that to Tennessee all year long. Tennessee's the sort of the number one field goal percentage defense in the country at like 38%. And for Kentucky to do that, the one thing that Tennessee does that, not like Auburn, is different when they play Kentucky. Auburn will switch a lot of stuff, and Tennessee likes to stay with their own. They switch on an emergency basis, but I do think that plays pretty well for Kentucky at times for running their offense. They can initiate offense all over the floor. in part because their big guy Amari Williams had transferred in from Drexel. And it's just kind of stunning to me that they haven't been able to kind of put the clamps on Kentucky's offense in those two games. And if Tennessee, like I think they can get good performances out of Chaz Lanier and Zakai Ziegler and Jordan Gainey and all that. I think to win, they have to have their big guys play better, like Igor Milicic Jr. and Felix Akpara. They have to put numbers on the board. They can't just get 8 rebounds and 4 points or something. They got to do better. And those guys are like more screeners and the kind of screener scorer action,
Mm-hmm.
but they've got to be more aggressive, especially Milicic, because he can shoot it. He can really stretch the floor as long as he stays out of foul trouble. He's another weapon out there.
As a coach, if you're on Rick Barnes' staff and he's like, guys, what do we do different this time? Can you say, hey, we're switching every screen? I know we haven't done that all year. It's not in our DNA. We're doing that because let's see, we've got to change something. Do you think that's something Barnes would consider?
I doubt they'll change too much because it's kind of this is who they are thing.
Oh boy.
And they're good at it. Like Kentucky's been the only team that's done this. It's not like they haven't played really good teams. Like you remember they played Florida three times. But the first 2 times they played them, I mean, who could figure those games out? Like Florida beat the brakes off them one time. They beat them by like 30.
Yes.
And then Tennessee turns around shorthanded and beats them by 20.
Yeah, that's right.
Who could have predict like the unpredictability of that was stunning to me. But it's not that I would change anything. I think they have to score more efficiently. Like, obviously letting somebody shoot 50% when you're that good defensively is bothersome. But I still think their offense is a big key to how they play. I think they play better most teams do. When you're putting the ball through the basket, everything looks rosier.
Yeah.
It's
almost
weapons.
I think you're right. So they shot 3 for 18 against Kentucky from 3 in the second meeting. And the first one they were, and this is stunning, 11 for 45.
Yeah,
so
45.
Essentially Kentucky saying, take all the threes you want. We don't trust you as shooters. We're fine.
Yeah, I mean, and Kentucky's actually been really good defending the 3-point line. Like they've been better. Kentucky's been better over the last 10 games or so defensively. Like their defensive numbers are up kind of near the top defense. They're not at the top defensive team level, but they're getting closer to it. And that was not true for a good part of the season. They were kind of easy to score on. They were just really hard to stop. And they've been much better defensively. Part of that's Amari Williams has been a better rim protector. And then they have Lamont Butler getting healthier, and he's at the point of attack. So that that battle between him and Zakai Ziegler is going to be really good.
Oh, yeah.
But really, if you can slow down, Chaz Lanier is the whole key. Like he's averaging 23, 24 points a game in the tournament, at 29 in their first game, and he can do that. The only Rick has done a great job of finding these guys. Like I saw Chaz Lanier play at North Florida. I didn't think he was this good, honestly. But I'd seen Dalton Connect at Northern Colorado. I didn't think he was that good. Not that I didn't think he was that good, but that I didn't think he was as good as he was at Tennessee. Like I didn't see
SEC Player of the Year. Come on,
see that coming. Top 10 draft pick, all that.
Yeah.
But the difference between Connect, like if Lanier has 19 points in the first half, and last year Dalton Connect had 19, Dalton Connect wanted 40, and Lanier wants to make the right play, and like. No, man, go get 40.
Yeah.
Like, you open things up for everybody else. And I think he's getting better at that, but I don't think it's a natural thing for him to, look to bury somebody and look to get 40. But he's gotten better at that. He's much more aggressive, I think, now than he was a month ago or 2 months ago. I'm
sure that was your mindset back in the day, right? Against Never Nervous Purvis and all those guys.
Mine was just to get through the 40 minutes. 40 points. Not that 40 points for me was a 4-game stretch.
4 game. All right. The great Jay Bilas, ESPN. Jay, continued success. Love your work and keep up the great analysis, my man.
Right back at you. Thanks for having me.